Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Claudia Allen, and I am the Community Outreach Supervisor. And on behalf of the Howard County Office of Human Rights and Equity, it is truly a pleasure to present to you a virtual program on teaching human rights and equity. And today's program will feature a discussion with Dr. Denise Boston, who is the Equity and Restorative Practices Manager here at OHRE. Randee Wilding, who is the Chief Operating Officer for the Bracy Center for Human Reconciliation, Erika Chavarria, which is Wilde Lake High School Spanish teacher, founder of Columbia Community Care, and she was also our 2020 recipient of the Human Rights Commission Award, and Kenny Porrit, who is the Reach Academy program lead and special educator at Long Reach High School. And I'm so excited that they are going to introduce themselves in greater detail very soon. Now, for those of you who are watching us on Facebook right now, I want to make sure that you like our page and you'll get more updates about our virtual and in-person events. So make sure that you like the OHRE Facebook page. But there are some of you who are watching us on the county YouTube channel right now. And so I want you to make sure that you click subscribe. And if you click subscribe to the county YouTube channel, you'll receive notifications on everything happening in Howard County government. And if you're watching this recording on GTV a little later, then I want you to right now just pull out your phone, open Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and follow us at HOCO OHRE, at HOCO OHRE. It is right there in my name tag. For those of you that want to keep up with everything that we're doing right here in the Office of Human Rights and Equity. Now, there are those of you who may not be familiar with our office. And so before we get into our program this afternoon, I just want to take a few minutes to let you know a little bit about who we are and what we do. Now, the Howard County Office of Human Rights and Equity is an entity of the Howard County government that seeks to eradicate discrimination, increase equal opportunity, and protect and promote human rights right here in the county. The office serves as a catalyst in fostering attitudes and beliefs among Howard County residents, which confirm that all individuals have an equal opportunity to enjoy a wholesome and productive quality of life and pursue their lives free of discrimination. Now, under the leadership of Yolanda F. Saunier, Administrator of OHRE, we aim to provide Howard County residents with excellent service and programming. And OHRE accomplishes the work of protecting and promoting human rights in Howard County, Maryland, through our 3 units: the Investigations Unit, the Equity and Restorative Practices Unit, and the Community Outreach Unit. Now, the Investigations Unit, under the leadership of Juan Torres, he is the lead investigator and compliance officer. Their unit actually considers and processes complaints of unlawful discrimination in employment, housing, public accommodation, and financing. In addition, the investigations unit enforces Howard County's human rights law, and they also conduct public hearings on issues affecting the protection and promotion of human rights. Now, the Equity and Restorative Practices Unit, which is under the leadership of Dr. Denise Boston, they actually utilize an equity-centered lens to infuse concepts of equity in the county's service delivery, their decision-making, and resource distributions. ERP seeks to ensure a shared organizational understanding of racial equity and social justice by supporting departments and staff for transformational change and operating equitable practices, policies, and procedures that result in more fair and just outcomes. And finally, the community outreach led by myself is committed to increasing the presence of and work within the Office of Human Rights and Equity as a whole throughout our community. And we accomplish this by creating opportunities for Howard County residents to affirm their humanity while protecting that of their neighbors. And more specifically, our unit provides trainings, workshops, presentations, listening sessions, events, and so much more to government agencies, organizations, and community members around racial equity, social justice, and human relations. And together, our office's mission is to eradicate discrimination, increase equal opportunity, and protect and promote human rights here in Howard County, Maryland. And this afternoon, our aim is to explore these very ideals through this virtual event on teaching human rights and equity as we talk with educators on social justice in the classroom. And as many of you know, today is National Teachers Day, but many school systems, including our very own Howard County Public School System, are celebrating National Teacher Appreciation all week. And Marla Moore, one of my community outreach coordinators, had the fabulous idea of spotlighting some of the educators that are here in our community who specifically do work at the intersection of education and human rights. And I am so grateful and proud of her for putting on this stellar program. She and I are both former educators at the university level, and we infuse our passion for education in much of the work that we do in the community outreach unit. And because of this, we tend to do this because, as Bell Hooks puts in her book, Teaching to Transgress, Education as the Practice of Freedom, quote, the classroom remains the most radical space of possibility in the academy, end quote. But we truly want to focus on those who every day in very targeted ways are educating children, youth, as well as adults of various backgrounds. And it's for this reason that Bell Hooks continues writing, quote, as a classroom community, our capacity to generate excitement is deeply affected by our interest in one another and hearing one another's voices and recognizing one another's presence, end quote. This afternoon, my hope is that we generate excitement around teaching human rights and equity as we elevate a variety of voices in education to greater understand the sacrifices that our teachers make on a daily basis, how they infuse human rights and equity into their engagement with students, and more importantly, how we can be agents and allies that actively work together to ensure that all people, in the words of Paulo Freire, regain their humanity. And it's at this time that I am so excited to introduce to some and present to others our distinguished guests. And I'm going to have them introduce themselves shortly. First, I have Erika Chavarria. I have Randee Wilding. I have Kenny Porrit. And I have our very own Dr. Denise Boston. Thank you all so much for being here. Erika, I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself first.
Good afternoon. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Erika Chavarria. I am a 12th year Spanish teacher at Wilde Lake High School. I'm very proud to be there. I graduated from Wilde Lake in the year 2000 and ended up right back where I was a student. I teach from an anti-racist Afro-Indigenous lens in my classroom. I am also the advisor to Wilde Lake Students for Social Justice, which I'm very excited has done such incredible work and was also one of the recipients of the Human Rights Award for Howard County. Very excited to work with those young people who are doing incredible work. I'm also on the board of the Anti-Racist Education Alliance, founded by another educator, Matthew Vaughn Smith. And I am also on the board of an organization that fights anti-Black racism, called Racial Justice Now. I'm also the founder of the COVID relief organization, Columbia Community Care, who has, along with hundreds and hundreds of volunteers and donors from across the county, been able to provide hundreds of thousands of our residents with food and necessary supplies during the pandemic. And we are heading in a more holistic direction in the near future. So thanks again for having me.
Thanks so much, Erika. Randee, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Randee Wilding. I am the Chief Operating Officer of the Bracy Center for Human Reconciliation. And before I say anything about myself, I wanted to extend a warm thank you to all of our teachers out there. It has been a pretty insane couple of years, specifically those that are in with the students and had to adapt and accommodate for the COVID pandemic. So thank you. Our organization is a learning organization, and we are focused on the eradication of racism and other forms of human oppression. And we address that in a few different ways. We have monthly book discussions. We also have online training. We call that Eradicating Racism, a Path Forward. And we also engage people in social media and really through email and through our Finding Your Voice program, which is an ongoing program that enables people to leverage each other's strength throughout the county and throughout the country. So it is a national organization, and I am very honored to be an active member and also on the leadership team.
Thanks so much, Randee. All right, Kenny, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm Kenny Porrit. I'm a special educator here at Longreach High School, and also one of the program leads of our Reach Academy, working specifically with our ninth graders. Very happy to be here, kind of representing all the great things that are happening over here at Longreach High School. And also, just to add on to that, I'm one of the assistant principals for the evening school program here in Howard County Public Schools, and our comprehensive summer school program as well.
And of course, certainly last but not least, our very own Dr. Denise Boston.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here and joining us. My name is Dr. Denise Boston. I'm the Equity and Restorative Practices Manager here in the Office of Rights and Equity. And I'm also a professor of counseling psychology. So I've been teaching for over 20 years in higher education. Currently, I'm teaching at Trinity Washington University in Washington, D.C. And I'm teaching a trauma-informed psychology course to counselors who work in Ward 7 and 8 in Washington, D.C. And I'm also teaching expressive arts therapy for trauma-informed care. I have a student-centered lens in the ways in which I teach. And I believe that, the ways that we engage our students is very socially conscious. I know that's my pedagogy and my andragogy in the ways in which I want to create critical thinking around how do we look at the world as educators, as teachers, as students. And I see this work as lifelong learning. So I also, like Randee, want to say thank you to our teachers out there who weathered the COVID journey and did it with grace and love and a lot of care for our students. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Dr. Boston. So everyone, I want to ask all of you this, but I'll address it to Erika first, and we'll go around the panel. But what is or should be the role of educators in advancing human rights and equity? What are your thoughts, Erika?
So I'm gonna answer this question through really understanding my approach to education and my moral ground when I was thinking about being an educator and through my journey as an educator. There are two main things. One is there's an educator in Massachusetts who discusses something called the Educatic Oath. And like the Hippocratic Oath, which is first do no harm to patients, the Educatic Oath is first do no harm to students. And so I refuse to participate in anything that I believe further harms my students, whether it's in the classroom or outside of the classroom. And I also refuse to, so I will not participate in the harm, and I will fight back against any type of harm done to my students. And again, that's within the classroom and without. We know that there is not a single aspect of education nor of our society that is free from injustice. So we cannot be neutral. And I'm going to bring this back to Freire. I know I heard you mention Freire earlier. Paulo Freire has a quote called "The educator has the duty of not being neutral." Education is inherently political. Our world is political, and we know that we have over 400 years of systemic oppression, racism, and injustice that we have to come to terms with, to face, and to acknowledge. We have an obligation to teach the truth. We have to understand that our students have very different experiences based on however they identify and how the world views them, and we cannot ignore that. Otherwise, we are responsible for harm done to our students. And again, I refuse to participate in that harm. And so I approach the classroom in a way in which everything that I do with my students must connect to their everyday lives, must affirm their existence, I want my students to always feel safe. And that includes the teaching of human rights. We want to make sure that our young people are growing up with a critical consciousness and a lens to do better in the world, to make their lives better, to make the world around them better. And so we have to begin by acknowledging and affirming their identities. If you look into my classroom, you'll see all around the walls just messages and pictures of affirmation. And I mentioned earlier that I teach from an Afro and Indigenous centric lens. And that's because I believe that our school systems, education in general, nationwide across the, throughout history, as well as the way that we structure school every day, as well as our pedagogy, is typically white norm and white normative in a Eurocentric white lens. And so I believe that it is imperative that my classroom be the opposite of that. And so white is not the norm in my classroom. It is something that my students face every day in society where whiteness is the norm. And so we have that obligation as educators to make sure that we are focusing on human rights, civil rights, and affirming our young people in our classrooms every single day.
Thanks so much for that, Erika. Kenny, I'm going to come to you because I know you mentioned that you work with special ed. And so I'd love to kind of hear, what are your thoughts on bringing human rights and equity into the classroom?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to kind of, paraphrase a little bit from my little book of restorative justice I have here. And, just simply, how I operate and how my colleagues operate here is, we always start with, how are the students doing? Looking at, developing those relationships, creating a sense of community and belonging goes such a long way, and if we're meeting our students' basic needs, right, that we know that, the vulnerable and the marginalized students are going to be cared for and they're going to be included, and then, going back, also looking at the dignity and humanity of just, each student is a human being. They matter, right? And if everyone's needs, are heard and met, we're creating that safe space, like Erika talked about. We're creating that sense of community, that belonging, and that's simply, where, in my line of work, whether it's in special education, also just with our ninth graders in the academy, that's where it starts for us. And that's where we, operate through that lens of and just starting those healthy relationships and, making sure that, all our students are included, and just treating them simply as human beings when they're in our classrooms.
Absolutely. Randee, I want to come to you. I know you teach adults, and so that's a very interesting context, both you and Dr. Boston. And so I'm excited to kind of hear both of your perspectives on how do we bring human rights and equity into the classroom?
Well, for my classroom has been primarily virtual and really focused on, I would say, unlearning some unhealthy behavior and also having a fuller understanding of history. So not shying away from being uncomfortable, I think, is one. I really wish that I had had Erika and Kenny as a teacher growing up, and I totally echo everything that Erika said about the centricity in the school system. For me, it is trying to relate to other adults as a parent, as a cisgender gay man, married, as a father of adopted children. I am really kind of putting my heart out there in order to relate to people and get to a place where they're comfortable enough to listen, learn, and hopefully grow.
Absolutely. Now, Dr. Boston, you mentioned that you take a kind of student-focused approach in your classroom. Can you talk to us a little bit about that and how you're engaging human rights and equity?
Well, I think that teachers really must be culturally responsive as they walk into their classroom settings, which means that you meet the young people and the older people. I teach all ages, 18 to 60, 70, who's ever in the classroom.
Yeah.
World is going to change. When I say culturally responsive, I mean meeting them where they are from a cultural perspective. Who's walking in your classroom? What are the intersectionalities of who they are? And how can you meet them based on your own intersectionality? So I believe teachers need to really do a lot of work on themselves to be able to gain that kind of relationship and trust within the classroom. And to see that it's not that you're putting information inside of anybody. You are embracing everyone's ability to learn and to find the ways inside themselves that's going to help them see that their role in life is critical to not only the classroom, but to the world. And so bringing authors into the classroom that inspires young people, bringing Angela Davis' work into the classroom, bringing Paulo Freire's work into the classroom. So encouraging young people to read, and older people to read, and that's going to really inspire them to see themselves as change agents in the world. I love, and I deeply love teaching. I think I'll do it for the rest of my life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really appreciate that you were kind of talking about thinking about the intersection of our students. I remember one semester I was teaching kind of like a freshman comp course, and I had a student who was African American, Muslim, male, and I guess his family was not Muslim. He had become Muslim, but he had basically no financial support whatsoever. So he was working about 2 or 3 jobs while also trying to do school full time. And so he really came to me like, "Hey, Professor Allen, like I literally just got in from work. I haven't slept for like 24 hours. I don't have this paper, you know?" And, so what are some of the practical things that you guys do when it comes to actually facilitating social justice or human rights in the classroom? I know in that particular situation, I was giving him, you know, his own personal deadlines, basically, because he was living a very different life from the majority of my other students. And so, what are maybe, and I know, Erika, you talked a little bit about this as well when you were talking about even how your classroom is structured and set up. And so, I'd love to know kind of practically, what are you guys doing to kind of help facilitate and foster social justice in the classroom? And Dr. Boston, I'll start with you this time.
Oh, okay. I think having those individual conversations, I create a rubric so students they know what the expectations of the course is when they walk in. And I spend a lot of time talking about, what they're going to be doing and what do I want them to walk away with and what do they want to walk away with. And then based on what the timeline is, because I have students like that too, Claudia, who have lifestyles, especially adult learners. I mean, I went back to school as an adult learner, so I know when you're taking care of a family, a full-time position, job, and you're trying to learn because you want to just, grow and develop. You have, but at the same time, there are things that has to happen for you to pass. And so
Yeah.
I think my thing is just creating a relationship where they can really trust that I got their back. Once they realize that we're in this together, they will do their very best. And they know that I want them to be their very best. So relational, the idea of teacher-student relationship is.
Wow. Yeah, that's so great. Randee, what about you? I know you were talking about you're in a more virtual context, but how are you kind of facilitating social justice and human rights right now?
So to Dr. Boston's point, that is actually what we got your back is actually the slogan or the tagline that we use for our Finding Your Voice program. And the idea is that people are coming from all across the country. We've had conversations where they may be the only people, or at least they believe that they're the only people in their community who feel the way that they do. So in one sense, it becomes a peer support group, but also it becomes an online space for continuous learning. And that's really where the magic happens, because you have the teacher becomes the student. So Paul Bracy, who is the founder of the Bracy Center, we facilitate the conversations, but we're also students, and we don't shy away from the fact that we don't know everything, and that we're learning every time we have one of these conversations, every time we have a class. If we're doing it correctly, everyone on the class, in the room, in the virtual room, is learning, and also we are as well. The other change that I would say since the pandemic, we had created a class that was essentially 16 hours worth of work. That was 8 hours of online learning, and broken up in 4 different sessions. It worked during COVID. That doesn't necessarily work now.
Gotcha.
At least it worked for some people during COVID. So we are thinking about the different ways of how can we get our message across, and how can we get to the people who need the information and who want it.
Absolutely. That's so great. Kenny, what about you?
Yeah, I think one of the things in our program, it starts with the intentionality. You got to do things with intention to create spaces for students, to have conversations. And I talked about relationships and having a sense of belonging. Erika talked about systems earlier, and if we look from the top down, we're required to get through a curriculum. We're required to get through a timeline, and you have to hit this mark at this point. But I'm very blessed, and we're very blessed here at Long Ridge. We have great administration who kind of understand what we do, and we intentionally take time out of the curriculum to build those relationships. Where we sit in a circle, we flatten the power dynamics where kids have a shared power in a space. We are in classrooms with shared values and guidelines. We intentionally talk about, different conversations in what we call our advisory. Every Friday, these kids, were given an opportunity to sit in the shared space and stop curriculum, where we talk about what a safe space is. We talk about what a safe space is for them personally, and we talk about what a safe space is for the classroom. And just the difference that makes, in the classroom, and also bringing in outside resources. We've had, visitors from your office come in and work with our students. We've had, visitors from the Baltimore City of, Office of Civil Rights. We've gone on field trips to the redlining exhibit, giving those kids those experiences. And just not hearing from their teacher all day. They don't just want to hear it from us, but bringing in those other resources make a huge difference.
That's awesome. Erika, I really wanted to kind of like end with you, because I don't want to pigeonhole you on this question, but I do want to hear more about your thoughts on kind of elevating Indigenous or persons of color who are authors and contributors within the curriculum. I know, when I was coming up as a young student, you didn't really read or engage with anyone that was not white, right? Like all the book reports, like all the activities, and I often wondered, are resources like this even available at the, let's say, elementary, middle, or high school level? I know myself, Dr. Boston, and Randee, we can, as a, in the adult or higher education realm, we can kind of bring different texts in, or different resources in, and it's not as difficult because it's at a higher level. But I'm wondering, how do you get to kind of prioritize these voices with young people? Are there textbooks? Talk to us a little bit more about how you're doing that.
Wow, there's so many things I could say about this. First of all, I don't use a textbook. I have never used a textbook in the 12 years I've been teaching. So I threw that right out the door. So no textbooks are ever used, because I don't find that they connect at all to our young people in any way, shape, or form. So I create all of my own materials, or I find materials from organizations like the ZenEd Project, Rethinking Schools. There's a plethora of organizations that do culturally responsive and anti-racist, that provide anti-racist and culturally responsive resources. One of the things that I do, some examples I can give you. So, I always start with the Afro-Latino perspective in my classroom. Many of our young people, actually many people in general, don't know that 50-something% of the Latino population is actually Afro-Latino Black, and don't know the history of that either. There's a book by Ivan van Sertima called They Were Here Before Columbus, about the African presence in Latin America hundreds of years before the European invasion and colonization of the Americas. And there's proof of that. And so we go over that book. We talk about the different ways in which there is African presence in Latin America, one through, like I said, hundreds of years before European invasion, where African explorers actually took navigation through the ocean and landed in the Americas, and were there to explore and not to steal and murder, but to engage and learn. And second of all, the transatlantic trade of enslaved Africans. A lot of people don't know that 95% of the ships actually went to Latin America and the Caribbean, and only 5% went to the United States. And so there is a massive Black population in Latin America, which is not discussed even in Latin America. The racism runs rampant, not just here in the United States, but even in Latin America as well. And the approach to racism was very different in European mentality in the Americas and Spain versus here in the United States. And so one of the things that Spain did in order to push and elevate their white supremacist approach was they believed that the mixing of races, indigenous, Black, and white Europeans, would eventually weed out Black and indigenous, and white would stay, and it would encourage more white European immigration. We know scientifically that is inaccurate. And so there was this very different approach to white supremacy in Latin America. And so the mindset of Latin Americans is very different in terms of color blindness, in terms of the racism that exists, but in very veiled ways, and in also very systemic ways. It is, the same as here, but here in the United States, the English or the British approach was segregation, separation. So there's a very different history, yet the racism is still rampant systemically and socially. And so we talk about all that in the classroom, beginning with that book. We talk about where the origin of all content areas come from, which is Africa. We look at music styles and how all of Latin American music is influenced by African rhythms and drums and beats and instruments. And so we talk about that. And then one of the other things that I do is make sure that, for example, when we talk about any type of curriculum or content that I do, I always connect it to a racial justice theme. And so, for example, I had to teach a unit on shopping. And so we actually did a project where our young people had to find Black and brown or BIPOC businesses within Howard County and do a dialogue as if they were in that store. And so we got to learn about the different businesses here in Howard County while they were using the vocab and the grammar in order to complete those projects. And so those are the types of things that I do. I always use any type of music, videos, art, expression is always indigenous centered, always Afro-Latino centered. So they never will see, and we actually talk. I say, in the beginning, name all the famous Latino people that you know. And it's always the J-Los, the Jennifer Lopez's, or the George Lopez's. And then I show them pictures and a presentation of all the famous Afro-Latino people that they did not know of. And that's how we kind of get the discussion going. So that's just a couple examples of what I do. But I always find ways to connect the curriculum to some sort of racial justice lens, particularly focused on Afro and Indigenous perspective.
That is so great. And for those of you that are watching, you asked, we see you in the comments, you asked for the name of the book. And so I've put the link, the Amazon link for you to get that as well. It's called They Came Before Columbus, The African Presence in Ancient America. And that link is there for you. Does anyone want to respond to what Erika just said before I, ask another question, take us another direction? Because I know she said a lot, but if there's anyone who also wants to add, maybe around what they do in terms of curriculum as well, that would be fantastic.
Well, I like to, when you bring authors and scholars in the classroom that looks like your students, students are engaged. They really feel that speaking their professor and teacher, you do have to do your research. So every person that's in the classroom sees themselves some way. So if you have 20 students in the classroom, you're doing research to find out 20 different ways to really share the experience with students. That's work. And so that's why I take my hat off to teachers that really go over and above what they're expected to do.
Absolutely. And, this is now kind of coming to my mind. I'm sure there are probably some people who are watching this that are like, oh my goodness, they are on here describing critical race theory. Are these people teaching my students critical race theory? What's happening? As we're wanting to elevate and support our students of color, are we also ostracizing and excluding maybe our white students? How are we making sure that even as we're incorporating BIPOC authors and a BIPOC centered curriculum, that those who are white are also still feeling like the educational space is a safe space for them? What are you guys' thoughts on that? Randee, I kind of see you smiling at me as I was, as I was talking.
Claudia, that's a hard one. It gets me every time when I hear about a white person complaining that their culture is being erased somehow, or they are going to be diminished in some way by learning something else. And I would serve up Heather McGee's The Sum of Us, which really talks about the fact that we have been sold as a society the zero-sum fallacy, that everything is pie, and that if this person gets a piece of pie, that means I'm not going to get the piece of pie. And I think everyone on this call and a lot of people who are listening understand the fact that that is not the case, and that we're so lucky to have such a beautifully diverse culture, and that embracing the complexity of our history, the diversity of our people, that is what makes us stronger. And the narrative that has to go along with that is that you're not actually going to miss out on something. So critical race theory in the classroom, we also know that that isn't actually the case, that is more of an academic and higher learning term. So I would also say that it has been taken as a device out of its context.
Thanks so much, Randee. I appreciate that. Dr. Boston, I kind of see you nodding as well. Is there anything you'd like to add?
Exactly. I mean, I said every student. So I am not separating students by their identities. I want to bring for every person that's sitting there, because it's as a teacher, it's my duty, it's my responsibility to make sure that everybody in that classroom has a sense of themselves. So that doesn't exclude anyone. We learn from each other, and the students have an opportunity in diverse classrooms. If they have the pleasure and the honor to be in a diverse classroom. I'm a product of Wilde Lake High School. I'm a product of Mount Hebron, a product of Howard High. I went to all three of the schools. I wouldn't be who I am today without having a diverse classroom and teachers who came from diverse backgrounds. So diversity it doesn't exclude exclude anybody. In fact, it really gives us more information than we even imagined. And I love what Erika said about textbooks, because a lot of learning are stories. When young people and older people tell their stories, that's fiction. So books are fantastic. They're wonderful. To tell their story process as well.
Thank you so much, Dr. Boston. And I think that's really a great transition, because I really want to come to you, Kenny, because I think there's not just kind of racial, ethnic, or cultural diversity in a lot of our classrooms, but there is diversity of learning style. There is diversity of cognitive approach. And so I'd love to kind of hear, what are your thoughts on how do you actually support and empower diverse learning styles within your students as well?
I mean, it kind of goes back with what I've been saying. It starts with those relationships and fostering that community and making kids feel safe. Promoting respect for student differences and like the topic that was just brought up, that representation piece, matters. And that's such a big part of that. And, another thing, about our academy is, oftentimes it may be viewed at first as a remedial program, but it's actually more of a step it up program where, students are required to take an honors or GT course in our program, where, when we used to come in and look at some upper level classes at a school like Longreach, you may see predominantly white students. And that's something that, not only are we fighting the achievement gap in a program like ours, but we're also, looking at our classrooms and looking at, who's in those classrooms and what makes up those classrooms. Because, again, going back to Erika talking about systems, oftentimes third grade is like that grade where students get cut off in either a GT track or on grade level or behind grade level track. And, the work that we're doing here, with our ninth graders is combating that and getting these kids back on track. And, someone like me who is not only a special educator and one of the program leads in the academy, but, providing some unique supports for those classrooms or for those students who may be taking a GT class for the first time. Going from a, 8th grade to 9th grade is, understand is a hard transition. But, figuring out what those barriers are in place and, just simply going back to that core question, like, how are the kids? How are they? And if we're meeting their basic needs, they're going to shine in the classroom. And that's just so important that once we figure out those barriers and those basic needs, the kids take off and they excel and they do wonderful.
That's really great. I know one of the things that I'm also thinking is hard potentially on probably teachers as well, though, is, if you've got 25 kids in a classroom and you've got one lesson plan that we've got to get through, and then there's the possibility that there might be someone present who is neurodivergent. Maybe there's someone who is on the autism spectrum. Maybe there is somebody who, I know Dr. Boston kind of is, the clinical psychologist with us. There might be someone who has a mental disorder or a mental disability of some kind. And so it's like, how do we make space for ensuring that they're having an equitable educational experience, and that their human rights are also being respected as well, even amongst students, amongst their peers, as well as from what we're giving when, you've got so much on your shoulders already in terms of having to kind of get through the day and get through the materials, like what does that really look like, for many students?
And that is the case in our classrooms. That is in the case when you walk into, whether it's an academy class or any class, are diverse in multiple facets, where we do have students with IEPs, 504s, and different needs in the classrooms, and just going back to the core foundation of treating them as human beings and creating that sense of belonging and also a sense of community where there is shared values and guidelines where, it's not just the expectation from the teacher to be doing all the work for the community, right? We are a community. We're working together on this. Where, if there is someone in our community in our math class struggling, right, it's
Yeah.
a shared responsibility. And that takes work. It's not easy. I'd be sitting, would be lying about sitting here, like, oh, it's easy. We just do these things and it's magic and everything comes together and it's great. That's
Yeah.
not the case. But I'm also part of a wonderful team of teachers who have the shared work, and we're doing this together. And like I said, our administration is very supportive, and we have resources that we can go to outside of us when there is a struggle. So there is a lot of support for that. But again, it goes down to that community sense and having that shared responsibility, which these kids can take with them outside of the classroom, in our own communities, because it is a shared responsibility when we talk about the village, and so just continuing to model that and being a role model for our young ones, goes a long way.
I'd love to respond to that if I could.
Please.
Just for a moment.
Go ahead.
I agree with Kenny. Kenny and I have worked together in the restorative justice world, and I think it all comes down to relationships first and foremost. The most important thing beyond anything else is the building of relationships with your students and our young people, and especially now, looking at what we've been through, it's imperative that we are flexible. We had an opportunity to do school better, and we didn't take that opportunity as a nation. I believe I don't believe that the way that school operates on the everyday is functional for anyone. And so we had this opportunity to do something different, and we didn't, unfortunately. And so it's been a really rough year. But I think the flexibility, building those relationships with students, but also being flexible in terms of grading, in terms of due dates, in terms of how you are allowed to complete assignments. When I give projects, I give the option, individual, small group, or larger group, or partner. Also understanding that I have many students who are too afraid to speak in front of the whole class. So giving that option for a flip grid where they can record their verbal responses into a video just for me instead. Also, I have my classroom is set up physically. I have alternative seating. So I have beanbag chairs and gamer chairs and bouncy chairs and yoga mats and all different types of seating, so that, because if we think about us as older folks, right, we get work done best when we are physically comfortable. Nobody sits in a hard desk and chair and says, I'm going to get so much work done today. And so we have to think about that. Like, how are our students most comfortable, making sure that we're providing for their physical needs as well. I always allow food in my classroom, and they can have water if they need water, but also respecting individual needs. It was Ramadan this past month, and I usually allow food in my classroom, but this entire month it was a food-free zone, so that our young people who were Muslim, who are observing Ramadan, didn't have to feel that they were sitting in a classroom full of food. And so being culturally responsive and mindful of how you are approaching the classroom styles, I think, is also really important, that physical aspect. And then one other thing I wanted to quickly touch on is that I teach a language class. My language, Spanish, is inherently gendered, which is very difficult when we're looking at so many of our young people who identify on a spectrum of gender identities. And so working with our young people to try to find the best way so that when they are when they are speaking and identifying themselves, that there is a way to do that neutrally in a language that is inherently not neutral. And so that has been a challenge this year. And so as an educator, I've been very intent on making sure that we are able to adjust the words so that many of my students who identify in not as either male or female feel like they have a place in the classroom. And so that's been a challenge, but it has also been very rewarding when I see my students able to express themselves in a way that is most comfortable for them.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. So I'd love to kind of hear from all of you, maybe more personally, and who is a educator or a social justice warrior that you feel like has inspired the work that you do in the classroom. And I'll start with you, Randee.
So I would say our founder, Paul Bracy, but also I would say that it really is the teachers who are not shy about speaking up, the ones that are teaching our young people to be upstanders instead of bystanders, and helping them find their voice. That for me has been exemplary, and seeing people in the context of the COVID pandemic, like Erika, I mean, you just created a blanket for a community in need and rose to the occasion. And so just having that, seeing these fantastic examples of leadership and social responsibility inspires, and it keeps me going, honestly.
Absolutely. Dr. Boston, what about you? Who is your inspiration?
Well, I want to introduce a book to everybody, and I've been using this book, and I've been giving this book as a gift to my friends who are not even teachers, but people who are in the world doing facilitation of anti-racist work and racial justice work. It's called Teaching with Tenderness Toward an Embodied Practice by Becky Thompson. Understanding that our young people are coming in, especially because of COVID, with a lot of trauma. And if we're not consciously aware of being trauma informed, of understanding that the systems have perpetuated inequities in such a way that COVID just accentuated it, that our young people need a lot of love and tenderness in the classroom, not just from their teachers, but we have to teach our students to love and to have appreciation and a sense of empathy for their peers. So I think that's important as well. How do we model that as teachers for us to be able to really understand that people are going through a lot at a time? And how can the lesson also be around empathy and inclusive, radical relational awareness? So yes, teaching with tenderness.
Man, thank you so much for that. Kenny, how about you?
Yeah, I'm actually, I talked about my wonderful leadership team over here at Long Reach High School, and I want to highlight one of our administrators and kind of, my mentor on my journey of becoming a leader in the county, Richard Smart. He's an assistant principal here at Long Reach, and he's one of my mentors, like I said, but just the continued work that he does, not only with our students but our staff, and his constant modeling, and someone that we can go to if we are in the work and things are happening, that we can have courageous conversations, and we can continue to ask that question: is this good for students, or is this going to cause harm? He's someone that we can constantly check ourselves, recognize our own bias in the system, when those come into play, and not be afraid to recognize that in that space, and move along, in the right direction. But, he's someone that models it every single day here at Long Reach High School, and, in the Howard County community, and definitely someone I look up to as my mentor.
Thanks for that. Erika, how about you?
So my answer is a little untraditional. I don't have one particular person. There's so many. My mother first and foremost, but I think the inspiration that I've found to do this work comes from a couple different places. One, I have a soul family of educators from across the country who are like-minded, who are my ride or dies, the ones that I lean on, the ones that I can go to. And they are doing the anti-racist work all across the country. And so when I feel like I'm alone, I know that they're there and I can turn to them. And I'm talking East Coast, West Coast, North, South, everywhere. Second, I have really developed my thinking and my thoughts of the work that I do through our history, through the Black Power movement, the Rainbow Coalition, the Black Panthers, the Brown Berets, the Young Lords, the Young Patriots, the American Indian movement, reading the works of the people during that time, and seeing the young people be the leaders of movements. Fred Hampton, who created the Rainbow Coalition, was 21 when he was murdered by the FBI. 21 years old, a young person who was fighting. And then Jamila Liscott is an incredible author and educator. She wrote a book called Black Appetite, White Food, an incredible book that I would recommend for everybody. But the most important and the number one, the people who inspire me most are our young people. My students every single day are the ones that I see that when they realize the power that they have, they just go for it. The HOCO for Justice, which was the group that organized the march right after the murder of George Floyd, they pulled together the largest march in the history of Howard County in 3 days. We're talking high school and college students. And so those are the folks that really give me the inspiration to keep going, and the ones that continuously allow me to grow and to learn as an educator.
Man, thank you so much for that. And everybody, all the books that they have mentioned, I have dropped the links in the chat. Okay, we've got Teaching with Tenderness Toward an Embodied Practice. We've got Black Appetite, White Food, Issues of Race, Voice, and Justice Within and Beyond the Classroom. And so you definitely want to make sure to check out those links. Guys, it's crazy. We are coming to the end. We only have a few more minutes. What would you want your final takeaways for any of the viewers to be, whether they be parents, teachers, fellow students? What's your elevator pitch takeaway? And Erika, we'll begin with you.
There's so much, but I would just say continue being courageous and do the right thing. We must teach the truth. The Uniting to Save Our Schools organization is doing a month of teaching truth. And I think that it's important that we are not indoctrinating our young people. We are making sure that they are given all of the tools and resources, love, care, and affirmation needed to be their full and best selves, and that we have to come to terms with what this country was founded on. And if we're ever going to create change, we have to acknowledge the history of this country, and to keep making sure that our young people are at the center of every conversation. I think the next conversation should definitely highlight some young people about what they are doing in this world, because they are truly the leaders. They are truly the ones that are brilliant. If we remember and understand how brilliant and powerful they are, we just need to create the space to allow them to just do their thing. So I would say that would be my elevator pitch.
I love
thank
that.
you again for having me.
Absolutely. Randee, what about you?
So I would say that you're never too old to learn. One of the things that I've seen from people in working in this area is some people feel stuck. Adults specifically feel stuck in a certain mindset. And I want them to try and open their minds, whether it's learning about social justice, racial equity, learning something new, or reading a new book that brings empathy, that grows themselves. And hopefully they can then also pass that on to their children. We want to create a better future. We need to create a better future. My children are in the Howard County Public School System. And I want to know that at the end of my day, that I've done something to improve the world instead of making it worse. So, and again, thank you all so much, and I greatly respect all of you.
Absolutely. Kenny, how about you?
Yeah, we'll try not to repeat what Erika and Randee said, because that was great. Just going back to that relationship piece, like, we're all human, right? Treating each other with dignity as human beings, and know that we are, want those relationships, right? And if we have those relationships, whether it's community, whether whatever aspects of our life, those relationships matter, because if we have those relationships, we're less likely to cause harm and do harm to one another. So we got to continue to work and do that hard work, and bridge those gaps where those relationships are lacking, because that comes down to the foundation relationships.
Absolutely. And Dr. Boston.
I'd like to say it's been an honor to be in the presence of such fabulous educators. Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. I would say education is power. When you have an education that helps you understand who you are in the world and how you can have an impact on another person, that's powerful. So it's not just getting good, it's not just, academic achievement, but what it is, it's social awareness. And so how can we be more socially aware that we're all teachers and we have the capacity of really having a community of learners that's going to change the world. So thank you.
Absolutely. And I know I can say this on behalf of the Office of Human Rights and Equity, but we just want to thank each one of you, Erika, Randee, Kenny, Dr. Boston, just for being these amazing educators that are right here in our community, that are changing lives, changing minds, and ultimately building our Howard County community to become a better place by empowering and uplifting our young people, our adults, our seniors. We are all, we should all be committed to continuing to learn and grow. And it's because of educators like all of you that allow us to do that. And so thank you all so much. For all of you who have been watching, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. It has truly been a pleasure. We hope that this has been an insightful conversation, that you have learned something new, that you have a new appreciation for our teachers and our educators right here in Howard County. And like I said before, each and every book that we talked about is in the chat for you to get access to. But the Howard County Office of Human Rights and Equity, our outreach unit, we're doing a variety of initiatives this month that we want to make sure that you are a part of. The first, the next one that's coming up is on May 12th. May 12th, that is a Thursday night. May 12th, I'll be doing a presentation called Race is Not Just Black and White, exploring the racial history of Asians, Latinos, and Jews. And oftentimes when we talk about race, we talk about white people, we talk about Black people, but we don't really deal with the ways other groups have become racialized over time here in this country. And so please make sure to join us on Thursday, May 12th. That's going to be at 6:30 p.m. at North Laurel Community Center. And I've just dropped that link in the chat as well for you to register. But we talked about all kinds of books this afternoon. And the OHRE has a book discussion group called Reading Human Rights. And once a month, we get together with the Howard County Library System and we discuss a book that genuinely gets all of us into having these important conversations. And the book for May is called Minor Feelings. Minor Feelings in Asian American Reckoning by Kathy Park Hong. Minor Feelings. You want to join us as we have a continued conversation around the Asian American experience here in this country, and very broadly the immigrant experience here in this country as well. So make sure you join us for that. I've also dropped that link in the comment section as well. And again, guys, if you are not following us on social media, you are missing critical information. So please be sure to follow us at HOCO, O-H-R-E. It's right here in my name tag. Make sure that you're following us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at HOCO, O-H-R-E. And we look forward to seeing you next time for another transformative and inspiring conversation. Have a great rest of your afternoon. Bye-bye.